Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you here today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Daniel is the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and that's been around now about 3 years and is doing very, very well. And they're going to hold a significant event, and Daniel would like to talk a little bit about that event, and if anybody's interested, maybe we'll see him at the event.
Exactly. Well, it's Ron Paul's return to Washington,
Oh,
sort of. We're holding on September 10th, the day before September 11th, in Washington, D.C., a conference on peace and prosperity 2016. You know, we're going to make the case for non-interventionism, for minding our own business, for ending the U.S. empire. And the conference, of course, will feature you as the main speaker, but also a few of your closest friends and collaborators over the last many years that you've been in public life. So we have a pretty exciting, we're still putting together a lineup. So far, we have a pretty exciting lineup. Tickets have been on sale for just a week yet, and we're about a quarter sold out at our super early bird rate of $55, including lunch. Anyone who's interested, you should sign up and get your tickets right away. ronpaulinstitute.org/conference will get you more information about it. And we really are looking forward to seeing the people that we hear from and we talk to and we do our show for every week. I think it's going to be such fun.
Yeah, but you were challenging me of me going back to Washington. I haven't been too anxious about that. And we're going to be just outside of Washington.
That's true.
We're not going to go into the belly of the beast because what we're
right.
going to talk about today is I don't think I'm going to visit the House floor anytime soon.
That's true.
They might mug me or something. But that's the big news yesterday and today, and that has to do with you know, what went on yesterday when the Democrats took over the House. And I don't think they're the leaders. I don't think they're in charge of the House. I think the Republicans still are in charge, or at least they're supposed to be in charge. I don't think anybody's in charge. So it was really chaotic, continues to be chaotic. But for me, I think it's a reflection of the problems we have in the country, our economic problems, our political problems, our monetary policies, and our foreign policy. It's chaotic, and it turns into bickering. It's your fault. And sometimes it's amazing that they can have this much conflict between the two parties, almost coming to blows, and have such violent disagreements. At the same time, the big issue, I still argue, they're too much together. You know, this wasn't a discussion of is there a moral right to stealing from one group and given to another, the establishment of the welfare system, which is supposed to help the poor and helps the rich and helps the Wall Street. Is this over the Fed's secrecy in printing money? Is this over undeclared unconstitutional wars, the real problem we have with guns? No, this is about bickering and political correctness and who gets blamed to the point where, of course, this recent killing, you know, in Orlando, Omar Mateen, you know, this is a big issue. This has been an excuse for one side to say, we need to drop more bombs on those bad guys because it's all Islam's fault. And the other one say, no, don't say that. That's wrong. You can't blame Islam because you might offend somebody. You have to blame guns. Taking away the Second Amendment rights offends a lot of Americans. So this is, I think, very symbolic of the problems that we have talked about. But we'll talk now a little bit more about this and how we see this.
Well, you know, the Senate had rejected 4 gun control measures. They had a vote and rejected it. So really it was these measures were a moot point. But what the Democrats, or the majority of Democrats in the House, demanded that the House take up were votes on these kinds of bills. And they had to do with restricting the rights of people to purchase firearms if they happen to be on a terror watch list. They weren't getting the votes, and so they decided to go down to the floor and occupy the floor and sit around eating pizza and holding up signs and singing songs and that sort of thing.
Well, the first reaction I had when I saw it was, you know, it's in a way embarrassing that the deliberative body, you know, Senate and the House and our Congress, and we are the examples for the world on promoting liberty. But that wasn't I mean, that was a little bit embarrassing. But what bothered me though was that it was so symbolic, you know, of the problems that we have today. And I got to thinking, well, how can we put a good light on this? Well, Congress is blocked.
Yes.
You know, they weren't able to vote, and they probably had a couple bad bills they had to postpone. And I thought, at least that is good. But, that old saying that Congress is not in session, so we're safe from the legislative branch and the government, that's no longer true. I mean, Congress has abdicated its power and responsibility. It's been delivered to the courts and the bureaucrats and to the executive branch of government. So no matter how long they block these things, I don't think we need any new laws, to tell you the truth, or new appropriations. And I had a proposal one time that the only laws that they can pass are ones that reduce the size of scope of government. So I think government will march on, but this does show that there is indeed a lot of friction, and now the two sides will try to angle themselves to get their benefits. How does this mean we drop more bombs, or does this mean we need more watch lists?
Yeah. Well, this is the dialectics of Congress, really, because I was reading about it in the Senate. The Senate rejected these 4 gun control measures, but they said, "Oh, don't worry, we're going to take up some compromise measures." And isn't this how it works? That that they'll have a vote, so the Democrats will be able to tell their constituents, "We forced a vote on this issue." And then it'll be voted down so the Republicans can say, "We defeated these gun control measures." Then they'll get together and say, "Okay, let's split the difference and put something out there."
And then we'll check with the NRA and see if they approve, and see if they'll go along. But big government marches on. But after the incident in Orlando, they jumped at this because the Democrats said it was all about the guns, and I'm sure they sincerely believe that. The one thing though that when I look at strong motivation, minorities frequently are very anti-gun, but when you think about it, think of how many people in the inner cities get killed because they need a little bit more defense. And one thing they don't remember in the history of this country, some of the early anti-gun laws were passed after the Civil War to make sure blacks didn't get guns, And I imagine there's still some motivation like that. But the whole thing is they want to blame guns, but the Republicans say, well, it's radical Islam. And they go back and forth. There's so strong arguments, even Republicans shouting on the floor, guns did not kill these people, radical Islam did. But they imply that all Islam is radical. They don't say that some Islamists are radicals and can contribute to the atmosphere. But the individual that was involved, so far there's been no evidence that he was talking to the leadership of Al-Qaeda, and it's all mixed up. Another thing that I wished we knew more about, and maybe in time it will come out, and that is whether or not he could have been on medications. Yeah. He was deranged, and I think that he very well could be, because so many of these school shootings over the last several years, these kids have been put on psychotropic drugs.
It's interesting, people like those who screamed it's about radical Islam, why are they not screaming that the government should stop arming radical Islamists in Syria? They've been all behind this. 60% of those weapons we send to moderates end up in the hands of ISIS. Why aren't they worried about those radical Islamists? Why aren't they worried about the radical Islamists that they create by bombing families and irritating and causing so much pain and suffering with the survivors?
There was one story on the internet dealing with the sexuality of my teen, and that gets a little, more complex, because you can't blame, you don't know, but it's something that nobody talks about. Yeah. But I think ordinarily, if somebody in the distant future may look at, was he on psychotropic drugs, and how much of a conflict there was with his sexuality, and yet, guess what? The guns are a big issue. Radical Islam is a big issue. And I actually believe that there are radicals in all religions. There's radicals in Islam. And they may, from a distance, have an influence on a guy like this that's deranged. So I think that's very possible that could have happened, that there was an influence.
Well, you see people that blow up abortion clinics too. They justify that kind of violence because they become radicalized in in their religion.
Right, and the people who have looked at this, have all these other things, but the conclusion of the Republicans and the Democrats is that it has nothing to do with what promoted or encouraged or participated in motivating people to become more radical that are Islamic to begin with. Not that they represent Islam per se, but that it influences people. And guess what? There's pretty good evidence, totally denied by Republicans and Democrats, that our foreign policy has something to do with it. Our occupation, our killing of tens of thousands of people, and all the problems there. The migration problems that are going on right now, which serves the interest of the cultural Marxists. Some people like this idea of dissemination and forced assimilation of all races, and not on a voluntary basis, but under force. So they're delighted with it. But the Democrats are not addressing the subject because we find out that the Democrats are just as militaristic as the Republicans. So it's always something else, and they're in total denial that might have something to do with the motivation of radicalizing some people, which then indirectly may have an influence on some of the things going on around the world, not just here, but around the world, because we're not the only ones in the Middle East. There's allies with us, and they blame the United States because it's mostly our money and our weapons, but they blame France, they blame Belgium, they blame NATO, they blame the British, and there's a lot of anger, and people strike out when they're angry and hungry, and there are a lot of people. There probably is a sort of a policy of doing what's happening today, but there are a lot of people who are very innocent. I just cannot believe that they're able to get these thousands of people that will walk hundreds of miles trying to find some safety and food and say, well, they're all part of the conspiracy. Yeah. We're going to march over here and we're going to start shooting up nightclubs. I can't quite accept that. Other people might, but I can't accept that.
Yeah. Well, another aspect of this discussion that I think is so important, we talked about it before the show, is the actual issue at hand, the actual legislation at hand. And our good friend, someone we admire very much, Glenn Greenwald, who is himself a progressive, great writer, great civil libertarian. He has a wonderful piece out in The Intercept that really dismantles the Democrats' argument about this specific gun control measure, and that is they want to create secret terror watch lists that if someone is on that list, they cannot purchase firearms. They also cannot know whether or not they are on the list. We already have lists like that. They want to make it even worse. And as Greenwald points out, this is not an issue about guns. As a matter of fact, on guns, Greenwald may well be on the other side of the issue. But he points out this is about the Fifth Amendment. This is about due process. And if I can read a quick quote, he said, so now in the lexicon of the leading liberal lights of the Democratic Party, someone deemed by the U.S. government to be suspicious, placed in secret on a list with no evidence presented and no court process, is the equivalent of ISIS. That is chilling.
Yeah. And his point is most important, that is of due process. We can't deny our rights or our property without due process, but it's happening all the time. And I think the one statement, you're guilty until you're proven guilty. Yeah. They put you on the list. And then there are some individuals who have worked hard and get their name and excluded, and they get taken off the list, but their name doesn't leave the list. They're still there, and they go back to the airport, and they're still being harassed. But the other thing is how you get on the list, the details of how you get on the list. I think there's some regulations written, pages and pages and pages, but the truth is it's done in secret. Yeah. And you don't even know about it. You don't know when you're put on these lists. And in the Middle East, when there was a lot more military fighting over there in Iraq and other places, that we wanted to know who the bad guys are. Turn them in. Let us know if you will give us the name. So they call them up and give them the name, and they end up in Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib, and they're guilty until they die, But in the same way here, there was one statement, the person said, well, the FBI is so overwhelmed. They have thousands and thousands of cases. They can't investigate them. And one guy said casually, they said, well, somebody had called in and said, you better watch this guy. He's dangerous. And they said, well, we can't do it, so we'll just put him on the list, and you know, we'll deny him his rights, and think nothing of it, because he could be. Well, of course he could be, but and this is the whole thing that the right especially talks about terrorists, and they arrest people because they're a terrorist. You can't be in favor of terrorists. So they play this game of saying terrorism. He's a terrorist, and they don't deserve rights. Well, they're suspects, you know, and you're supposed to protect suspects, and they're supposed to have their day in court, and they have to have due process. There has to be search warrants. There has to be a little bit of rule of law, but there is no rule of law. And I think this is a reason why this symbolism of the chaos in Congress is going to get much worse. I've talked about the economic chaos and the foreign policy chaos, but the judicial chaos. If you look at the drug war and all, and how the judicial system rewards the people who come by and lie and prosecute and, you know, get the next guy and put the next guy in prison, and the guy that lies get off, and he might have been the main criminal. It's totally corrupt, and I think especially minorities know this, that the judicial system is very unfair. I mean, if you look at how that system works, and say for using the death penalty, the poor people don't have the attorneys, and most people now plead guilty. You know, make a plea bargain, you know, guilty or not, they don't have the money to defend themselves. If you do this, you get 5 years. If you don't, you're going to be in prison for life. And so they capitulate. So the judicial system is messed up, but at the same time, I think the the welfare state is messed up and doesn't work, and the financial system doesn't work. And I just saw those pictures of the chaos in Congress. That's the epitome of what's going on in our country and around the world. Really, there's no law and order, no due process, and I think one reason why people are getting upset is an attack on prosperity. And we've talked about the statistics on people's incomes not going up for 15 and 20 years. And can you imagine? That's in the United States, and we're doing pretty well. But if you look, even Europe, there's a lot more poor people there. What about the Middle East, where we've been there for 15 or 20 years, aggravating these people? So that is, people will be desperate when they're hungry, and they'll walk hundreds of miles, and the victims are going to be very hard to sort out from the ringleaders. But I think the real problem is philosophic. I think it's the nature of government, the belief in liberty, the protection of liberty as an individual, and have a government designed in a very limited fashion. And how many people care about when these incidents happen, both sides grabbing, boy, this gives me a chance. You know, we can promote more war, and we can go after those guns because the guns are at fault, and we can have more lists, put more people on lists, gives us power. And you know, they have two standards. There was one congressman interviewed the other day. He had a couple guards next to him, you know, I guess Capitol Hill guards with guns, and the reporter said, you want to take guns away, but you have two people there. Yeah, but we need protection. He literally, the words weren't exactly, but he was saying, we are special, we are different. The guns are here to protect us, and the government guns are different. Of course, I've tried to make the argument that, yeah, we need to regulate the guns that we sell. We're the biggest arms dealer in the world, and we're passing them out to our enemies in a pretense that we're really trying to establish order. And it just goes on and on. But this is, to me, a major step toward the climactic end of a system that is not viable.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word terrorist. I think whenever that word is uttered, people just switch their brains to off, and they stop thinking. You know, because this whole idea, what are the criteria for people to get on this terror list? It's secret. You have no idea. But we do know that the FBI considers people possible terrorists who question the government too much opposed to government. That could be a lot of people on the left and the right. It's a very slippery slope. What's next? You're denied your Second Amendment rights if you're on some secret list. Well, what about other rights that you have? What about voting rights? What about other things that you may enjoy? Property rights that you may be denied if you're on some list that you have no reason why you got on and you have no way to get off. It's something out of Franz Kafka.
Well, at least I think we have done a reasonable job in trying to describe the chaos and the problems that we faced. I would have to admit that there's no magic wand that we wave and we can correct all this in a minute, because it has to change the nature of people's thinking, the nature of the morality of so many people. That's not going to happen overnight. And we have to really change the understanding of what the role of government ought to be. And we have drifted a long way from the limited role of government that the founders tried to give us, because that doesn't exist anymore. And the rule of law, it has been thrown out the window. Governments do what they want. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, Congress really is like those pictures that we have seen. Just total chaos. Even when they're orderly, chaos can be orderly because all they're doing is nothing. They're only agitating and figuring out, the leadership on both parties figuring out how they can get together and have a compromise, how the budgets get passed and how the wars get paid for, and all these things. That's all done by the leadership of both parties behind the scenes, and yet the real chaos is what we see there. But this won't continue. It has to end. That's why we have a desperate need for some time and effort to get people to understand what is important. This is why we want to have this conference in Washington and talk about these issues on how people can get involved and spread this message, because as far as I'm concerned, ideology is the only thing that will change this. We have to change people's opinion. That if they think that it's more government, more rules, take away more civil liberties, more lists to have, and more bombs to drop, that is only making it much worse. We know what is right. We've had an introduction to the principles of liberty throughout our history, and most Americans know this and understand it, but they get influenced by the moment. And somebody's shouting this policy, and somebody else is shouting socialist policies and promises. Well, be leery of the promises and look more toward the promise for liberty and the movement toward liberty, and putting the responsibility on our welfare and our well-being on ourselves. That is what I think we need. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.